Hello, welcome to another episode of Test Chamber. I'm your permanent temporary host, Jeff Cork, joined today by Ben Hanson.
Hello, Jeff Cork. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And Matt Miller.
I am your permanent temporary guest.
This is fantastic. I feel like we have an established relationship here.
And we also have...
in a temporary sort of way.
We also have Isha.
The Protoss have launched a vessel from the dark side of Calder.
And that voice can mean only one thing. Starcraft 2, Heart of the Swarm expansion, right? Who could forget Isha?
Good old Isha.
Yeah. So Hanson, I know you're a big fan of this.
Yeah. I finished the campaign a little bit after Miller. Miller's the one who wrote the review, but yeah, I'm a big fan.
So you guys both get to walk me through this, because I'm going to admit, the last time I played StarCraft, there wasn't the number 2 involved.
Okay. Well, that's actually okay, because you could kind of understand what's going on, because if you play the original StarCraft, you remember Kerrigan.
Of course.
Okay, Kerrigan gets captured.
Right.
She goes all baddie.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
So, beginning of this game, she's gotten goodified again.
Okay.
Or humanified.
Which happens at the very end of Wings of Liberty. So this game picks up right after the end of StarCraft 2.
Exactly right. And by the point in the story, pretty early on that we're at right here, she has once again fallen into her bad ways.
Ah, jeez.
But for good reason, which
Okay.
we won't spoil here. But she's ticked off. She has had some bad things happen to her. She wants revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has to happen for that revenge is that she needs to make sure these Protoss don't send word back to their fleet. And so she is going to use her Zerg swarm to keep this ship from getting away.
She's gonna kill him. That's what you're dancing around it, Miller. Come on.
Listen, I mean, all things serve the swarm, is all I'm saying.
Right. For the Swarm, which is really Miller's motto. He's been saying it for years.
I've always said that.
Yeah.
Come on, guys.
Yeah.
All things serve the swarm. So this is one of the campaign missions in the game. The campaign itself, I think, is quite cool. It's a different sort of vibe from the first StarCraft 2 campaign, Wings of Liberty, in that it's significantly darker in a lot of ways. It's about some kind of monstrous aliens who are trying to infest various locations and take over other people's bodies. You're about to see something real bad happen to this girl right here.
She's such a pretty Protoss lady, too. Rare.
And there it is.
Yep.
Listen carefully. This ship contains many dangers.
Oh, interesting. Since we're replaying this mission, it has a different Kerrigan than the Kerrigan I had when I played it.
Oh, yeah.
Kill every last Protoss on
So
board.
just to clarify, we are going through your save game. You've already completed this mission, just to spell it out.
Yes.
So
Exactly. And as you can see, this mission, one of, I think, the emerging favorites for the new expansion, starts out in this very humble way. You're just accompanying this little larva through a Protoss ship, completely vulnerable. If it gets seen, you will get killed very quickly.
Use your parasitic invasion.
Yoink.
It also speaks to something that I think is interesting about the Heart of the Swarm campaign, which is that I think the game as a whole has a little bit more focus on these kind of dungeon crawl style encounters than really any Blizzard RTS has before. I mean, Warcraft 3 certainly had some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Wings of Liberty had some of that stuff. But I would say, without counting, I would say probably a full half of the missions, if not more, have some sort of interesting variation off of the normal kind of base expansion standard practice. Do you think that's fair, Ben?
I think that's probably fair, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of that stuff in Wings of Liberty as well, but
There is.
this one especially because Kerrigan's such a key component, and she's in almost every mission. This is one of the rare ones where you don't get to play as her.
Yeah, even when you're not playing as Kerrigan, you still have another kind of, very frequently have another kind of central character who is sort of your hero unit, which is a callback to Warcraft 3 for people who played that game. That game was all about hero classes and different heroes on each mission that you'd control. StarCraft 2, Heart of the Swarm, totally embraces that idea, but mostly keeps the focus on a single hero, which is Kerrigan. From time to time, you get a couple of other heroes, one of whom we're meeting in this mission, the the larva we're accompanying around slowly but surely is going to grow into a character that's actually kind of important to the overall campaign, which is kind of cool. It's a cool way to introduce a new crazy alien monster character. The idea that starts out as a larva and you've got to grow it.
And also, this mission's really fun because you get to control, as you can just saw, like the Ursidon, which is the giant kind of wampa creature, which is also a creature in StarCraft 1. And it's pretty rare to actually control them. I'm trying to remember if in StarCraft 1 you can use the Dark Templar to take over them or the Dark Archon.
Oh, I don't know.
But anyways, controlling like wildlife like that is very rare for StarCraft.
Yeah.
So it's a nerdy treat.
Your camera settings are going to make me puke, by the way.
Oh, really? I'm moving too much?
Oh, my God. You are killing me.
Sorry, I'll slow it down
Neither
a
here
little
nor
bit.
there, though. I'm going to lose my biomass.
Lose your biomass, and then the larva will absorb it.
Yeah, exactly.
You can see now this character has emerged.
Make my Zerglings. So, Cork, I'm curious why you haven't been interested in StarCraft. I know you just got a new computer.
And destroy the Protoss.
Honestly, it's mostly like a media PC, so it doesn't really lend itself to putting my mouse on my thigh while sitting on my couch, and I don't want to get a tiny desk in my my entertainment center room. So.
Well, I think Heart of the Swarm makes a good case for people coming back into the StarCraft 2 fold, whether you've played Wings of Liberty or not. If you hadn't played Wings of Liberty, and someone like yourself, Jeff, if you decided that you were interested in playing a really great RTS, the deal that you could get between like getting Wings of Liberty and then being able to roll right into the first expansion is pretty awesome. And both campaigns are really full-featured. I mean, it is an expansion, but in a lot of ways, I think this game stands on its own, other than the fact that you need the base game to play it.
Right. Does the expansion add any different units or additional gameplay mechanics for multiplayer?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about campaign first.
Okay.
In campaign, it adds, obviously, the whole focus is on the Zerg instead of the Terrans.
Right.
So, in almost every mission, with the exception of, I think, one, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, you're controlling the Zerg.
Yep.
You're also getting access to all these new strains of Zerg units that haven't shown up previously in the story, because the Zerg have always kind of been about evolution and growth in this kind of weird, screwed up kind of way, and they've made that the kind of almost like the theme for their gameplay this time around, in that between missions you're actually choosing not only ways to upgrade your hero character of Kerrigan, but you're also upgrading individual unit types. So for instance, we see some Zerglings running around here, and they have evolved. I think in this case have already evolved, right? This is the
Swarmlings.
The Swarmlings, exactly, which in my game, I actually have a totally different version of Zerglings that have little wings and they can jump up on cliffs and stuff like that.
They're called Raptors, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. And each Zerg unit in the game actually has that choice where you go on an evolution mission eventually and change them into some new form, which is pretty cool. So you have access to all those new units, of course, all new story events, and things move forward in the overall plot of Kerrigan and her vengeance against Manx.
Turns out she really wants revenge for getting screwed over.
She really does.
Yeah.
But of course, anybody who's really into StarCraft knows that is really only a part of the equation. Some people get the game just to play the campaign, but other people get the game just to play multiplayer. And multiplayer is, for all intents and purposes, as awesome as it has been before, but even better because of a bunch of behind-the-scenes changes, sort of under-the-hood stuff that multiplayer, I don't know, just kind of makes multiplayer more accessible, I think, and more appealing.
Okay.
I think they're really trying to draw in people who might be those campaign-only players into the multiplayer sphere. You now have what is actually a pretty decent tutorial mode.
Yeah, for sure.
To at least teach you the very basics. I think my biggest complaint about that tutorial mode, having played through it for a couple of different races, is that it gives you a really good grounding in how to do the first 5 minutes of a match, and not a great grounding in what happens after that. But that said, that first 5 minutes of a match is what I think probably most people get wrong.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty cool. They've expanded their versus AI options to kind of do some auto matchmaking against the AI that you can do. So it finds a kind of an appropriate AI difficulty to match you against, which I appreciated. Fun to play with just if you're getting online with your buddies and you want to play against the computer for a while. They've also added unranked matchmaking for true competitive play. So it's a good place for new players to dive in and just kind of get their feet wet. But it also serves as a good way for experienced players to try out a new race or a new build order, that kind of thing, without having to ruin their overall multiplayer rating, right?
Yeah, of course.
And then the actual competitive multiplayer itself is just as awesome as it's always been, but frankly, it's just as daunting as it's always been. I think that Blizzard is trying really hard to make a game that is friendly to new players to come into multiplayer, but at this point, you've got such a large body of people who really invest huge amounts of time and energy into the StarCraft multiplayer experience. That you really need to have a pretty serious commitment to really get in, to really get the most out of it, right? You need to be somebody who wants to spend some time watching some replays, that kind of thing.
That said, if you and your buddies buy this game and just go up against each other, you can still have a really good time.
Totally agree
I don't
with
want to
that.
just turn multiplayer off for everybody.
No, and nor would I turn multiplayer off for people who aren't playing with buddies. I mean, I think that time investment is worth it if you're willing to put it in, because it really is just such a remarkably balanced game. There's always a counter. Every unit has this like perfect counter of what you could throw up against it. But really learning how to do that and learning how to really move with the speed that you need to succeed in multiplayer takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But more so than almost any other online game I can think of, you really feel like you are growing as a player and you're getting better over time. But that said, I don't know if their matchmaking has quite gotten to the point yet that it's as friendly as it could be.
How so?
Well, I found that in my matches, I played a bunch of matches online before I wrote up my review, just against random people, and the game is meant to kind of, after a few matches, find you an appropriate skill level that you're playing against. And my experience was that the early games I played, I just totally got just mopped up, just totally lost, which I expected.
Yeah.
But even after that, once it kind of got a sense for the skill level that I was at, the matches were really up and down. There would be some matches I would play that would be against other people who were way below my skill level. And then there'd be other people who still I would go up against, and I'd have like 4 Marines, and all of a sudden they'd sweep in with like an army of 40 dudes into my base, right? And so I kind of had the extremes of both sides. I definitely was winning some matches and losing some matches, but I didn't always feel like I was really going up against people of the appropriate skill level. So I still think maybe there needs to be some work on that. That said, I know it's a really complicated problem to solve for in RTS, because people's skill levels are constantly changing and they're learning new things, so it's tricky.
Well, especially if they have the option of playing unranked matches. Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that multiplayer nonetheless is a blast. There's some new units that I think are going to be most appreciated by those folks who play a lot of StarCraft. Things like the Swarm host for the Zerg is one of my new favorite things. Is effectively almost like a siege tank for the Zerg.
Right, like a weird fusion of a carrier and a siege tank for the Zerg.
Yeah,
but then I think the most standout unit is another Zerg unit. It's the Viper.
The Viper's neat, yeah.
Which is like a giant dragonfly it has a super long tongue and it can rip other units off of cliffs or haul your units up on top of cliffs. So it's a pretty micro-intensive unit if you want to use it like that, but visually I think it's the most impressive.
Yeah.
But clearly, like, the campaign is focused on the Zerg. Does it feel as though the additions to multiplayer are kind of geared toward that as well? Or
they're so obsessed with balance in multiplayer.
Yeah.
So Zerg have those 2 new units.
Yeah, I think there's like two new units per faction. There may be 3, but I think there's 2, because it's the Viper and the Swarm host. the Protoss have the Tempest and the Mothership core.
Right.
And the Terrans have the Hellbat and I'm forgetting the other one. Do you?
Oh, they got the Spider Mines.
Yeah, the Widow Mines, right? Yeah. So there are those subtle changes, plus some new maps for multiplayer. But really, for people who are engaged with the multiplayer, the stuff that you should care about, I think, is that front end stuff of like the new game modes, new unranked stuff, the new kind of auto matchmaking versus AI, the new kind of putting arcade stuff front and center, which is their Blizzard's kind of mod thing. Which, by the way to go Blizzard, way to put these like hardworking creators right up front, make it easy for people to access that content. I think it's pretty crazy the amount of work that goes into some of these mods, that somebody is devoted enough to put together literally a whole team of people sometimes that effectively makes a new game in the Starcraft universe.
And also, despite the fact that I just died while talking, I should put out, like, the campaign on normal, it's not that tough.
No,
I thought
it's not.
Wings of Liberty was slightly more difficult.
There's a lot of hand-holding. I enjoy the campaign a lot, I should say, but there's a lot of stuff where it's like, okay, now you're going to go do this, now go do this, now go do this, and it's always telling you specifically what to do. The pacing of that campaign's a blast.
Yeah.
And the mission design's really interesting, but I did sometimes feel like if I was to level 2 complaints, it would be, one is that it's a little bit hand-holdy, and the other thing is that, like, all this focus on evolution and change never really pans out in the gameplay. The fact that, for instance, Ben here has chosen the Swarmlings, and I chose the Raptors for my Zerglings.
Yeah.
Never really factors into the story or into objectives that I have or anything like that. I think part of me would really like it if it had something where, like, in later missions, there would be things that were closed off to me. Because, like, I didn't have the Swarmlings, and I needed those guys, or I didn't have the Raptors. Or I did have the Raptors or the Swarmlings.
You're also leveling up Kerrigan as you go, and I feel like those different abilities do have a big impact on gameplay.
They do.
Or at least they're really interesting decisions. Like, it reminds me of the quality of even like Diablo 3's different skill trees, where it's really, when you get to that higher level, it's like, everything is awesome. I don't know how I choose.
Yeah, which is fun, right? And it's fun, especially on the Kerrigan stuff, that you can change it back and forth, right? So her highest tier of abilities is just ridiculous. There's one thing that lets you basically cause almost like a nuke. I think they call it Apocalypse or something like that. That's just like totally wrecks one whole area of the map. But alternately, you could set her top tier ability to summon in a bunch of drop pods, effectively turning an... I think you get something like another 10 units that just arrive.
You can just instantly summon an army, or you can call in the mothership.
Yeah.
That you walk around in the campaign itself.
Yeah, the Leviathan.
You know? Right.
So, all in all, I think the campaign's a lot of fun. It's a little bit, frankly, just weird, right? The main characters, other than Kerrigan, are, I mean, literally like characters like this crazy broodmother thing that's walking around, right? Those are your main characters, are these weird monster creatures. There's a character on board the Leviathan who's this guy who's guiding the evolution of the Zerg, and he's just this weird sort of DNA expert or something.
He is the most interesting character in the campaign.
Is, yeah. I mean,
he's great.
I actually kind of appreciate. I know Ben has a little bit different perspective on this, because I think even by your own measure, you're not really a huge sci-fi.
I like Star Wars. I like Star Trek, but I've never read a sci-fi novel.
And this game has kind of a little, what I would call a harder sci-fi edge, right? It's you don't have humans that you're talking to. You're interacting with aliens who have very strange purposes in mind and very strange motivations that are fundamentally non-human in their origins.
Would you consider this game to have strong storytelling, Miller? Because that's one of my big gripes, is I think the writing's a little weak. The overall story's fun, but I don't think it does enough interesting things as it progresses.
I like the storytelling. I think that the story... I sometimes make a distinction between storytelling and story.
Right.
And I think the story here is a little bit more cliched than it needs to be. In that, like, we kind of know what Kerrigan's gonna do all the time. Like, there's no big twists or turns.
I would say, since I wasn't following the coverage of this game because I didn't want it spoiled for me, there was a pretty big twist for me, which we've already kind of hinted at. in this test chamber, but there was a big beat in the story that I did not see coming, and it kind of reverts a lot of things that happens in Wings of Liberty, which is a bummer if you're looking to progress the story, but I didn't see it coming, so I'll defend it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one or two things like that, but overall the story left me a little bit wanting something else out of it, a little bit more surprising. But I think the storytelling itself and the interactions between the characters, which I know some people actually have said they don't like, that's one thing I really like in this game. I think Kerrigan's kind of weird, dark conversations with her subordinates aboard the Zerg ship are really kind of fascinating, right? Like they're sort of free of moral constraint. They're not kind of fundamentally evil, but they're also not like good guys by any means.
Right.
And her overall vibe is kind of reminiscent of, for people who are Game of Thrones fans, I think there's a little bit of Daenerys kind of vibe going on with Kerrigan, where she's got a single-minded devotion to a purpose, and she's going to do whatever she has to do to make it happen. Makes for a pretty fun ride.
All right, always comes down to this, Miller. If you had to reduce this, hypothetically, if you were to
hypothetically speaking, not that we would ever do this.
If you were told to make money, you have to play this game through its entirety, and then, on a scale of 1 to 10, assign a value.
In that case, I would give this game an 8.75.
All right. Did you review StarCraft 2 then?
I didn't review the first StarCraft 2.
Okay.
I think Adam was on our review for that game, and I want to say he gave that game a 10.
He did give it a 10, yeah.
All right.
And I think that a lot of that was from the fact that at the time it was completely new, right? Like it was fundamentally reintroducing StarCraft to the world, and the multiplayer. As great as the multiplayer is here, it is really, to use a word I was using earlier, an evolution of an existing structure here in Heart of the Swarm. So I don't know that it deserves for me the same credit as what the first game had. And I think overall the storyline and the missions in the first game might have been a little bit stronger at certain points.
Definitely.
But that said, there's a lot of things about this story and these missions that I like a lot as well. Cool. So it's a great game. No reason you shouldn't pick it up, even with some small quibbling complaints. I think Blizzard is on the right track with this series, and I am already excited to play Part 3, which is probably going to be like 17 years from now.
Correct.
All right, so look forward to that. 17 years.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you again with another episode of Test Chamber.